Welcome to another video about microservices. Today we will learn about Spring Cloud configuration and how we can use it to manage the configuration of our services. As per Spring Cloud Config provides server and client-side support for externalized configuration in a distributed system. Basically, what it means is that we can store and version the contents of the application property file in Git. We can also update the configuration at runtime, and it is accessible via Git URI. For this demonstration, we will need to set up two projects. One we should be already familiar with, the Terra Warehouse catalog. This is our catalog microservice. The Terra Warehouse config server, which is a configuration server that reads the configuration from a Git store. So first is we need to create a new Spring Boot project, Terra Warehouse config server, and add the dependency Spring Cloud config server. Then we need to annotate the main Spring Boot class with @enable config server. And finally, we need to create an application file and add the key Spring Boot config server GIT URI. Make sure that this folder exists in your local computer. So let's create it. Git, cd git, and we will configure this directory as a repository later. Or we can initialize the repository now. So now we have a local repository, and let's run the configuration server. What it will do is it will load all the configurations available in the Git repository specified by this key. So right now, we haven't really created any configuration file. Next is we need to set up the Terra Warehouse catalog project. So we need to update this and add a dependency that will let us connect to the config server and pull the configuration from Git. So the dependency is Spring Cloud starter config. And we need to update the configuration. So we need to remove the application property files and create a new bootstrap.properties. Bootstrap.properties is a file that is being used by Spring Cloud. So what Spring does is it will load the bootstrap first, and it will look for the config URI and load the rest of the configuration from there. Another important key in this property file is the application name. The application name is the name that we will use in the configuration file that we will save in the Git folder. So in this case, I already prefer the catalog.properties. So let's copy this one and paste it on our Git repository. It contains this configuration. So it should run on port 8001. Make sure that you update the data source configuration, because these configurations are pointing on my local database. Okay, now we have pasted the catalog.properties. We need to add it. So every time there is some changes, or if you add a new file in the Git repository, make sure that you add it and commit, so that our configuration server will pick it up. So it's loaded. Okay, let's try running our config server again. I think we already ran it earlier. Anyway, let's try running it. This time it should be able to pick up the catalog configuration file that we have just created. Localhost. So our config server is running on localhost port 8000, and we should be able to access the property via application name, which is the catalog, and the profile, which we did not specify. And by default, the default profile is, yes, default. So it will load the configurations from the catalog from the default properties or from the catalog.properties file that we have created. So when we run, let's try to run this Terra Warehouse catalog. And before you run it, again, take note that, or check if it's really pointing to the correct config server and it has the correct application name. Correct application name means you have this property file in your local Git repository. So let's run the Terra Warehouse catalog. I already created some Spring Boot build. So when you first run this via this command, right-clicking, run as or debug as, Spring Boot, it will create a new debug or run configuration. So here I have the Terra Warehouse catalog build. Let's remove the environment integrations. Okay, so it should load the default profile, which is the catalog.properties, meaning it should run on port 8001. Okay, I think it's starting. And let's check if it's correctly running. I already prepare a controller ahead of time that we can test, which is the filtered controller. What it does it prints the port to which the server is running. So let's try accessing it. 8001 API B1. API B1 is the value that we have in the catalog.properties where I overridden the context path value. API B1, the request mapping path is test and hello. Test hello. It should print port 8001, which is correct. So now we are running on the default profile, or we can say, or let's say that this is the development profile. What if we have staging, integration, production? It's easy to create a new configuration file. If you have a config server, all you need to do is copy the default profile and append it with the profile that you will create. So in this case, let's say this is the integration profile and we will change, or it needs to run on a different port. For example, let's say port 8002. Okay, now we have a new configuration. Again, don't forget to commit the file, or don't forget to commit when you have changes on your local Git repository. Okay. And next is we need to create a new debug or run configuration. Initially, you have only one, so you can duplicate this one, which I already did. So I have this configuration, and this is the Maven profile. So don't confuse this profile by the Spring profiles active key, which is this one. Again, this is a Maven profile. It's not the Spring profile. So to load the correct Spring profile, which is the integration, we need to add a new environment variable Spring.profileSActive and set it to integration. So it's already saved. We just need to run it. It should run on port 8002. Once it's running, we should be able to see or to check if it's correctly running on the correct port. First, if we try visiting this link again, it should not be accessible. Should not load, yeah? And let's change the port to 8002. And yeah, I think it's running correctly because it logs or it writes the correct port, which is 8002 from our integration profile. Again, to load a different profile, you need to specify the spring.profiles.active key when you run your Spring application. Sometimes we forget about that, and that causes some unwanted effects, especially if there's another profile that is being loaded. That should do it for this video, hoping that what I shared today could be of use to you tomorrow. If you learned from this video, please subscribe to my channel and get notified. That will validate that what I'm doing is indeed helpful for others and will definitely inspire me to share more. Thanks again for watching and goodbye.